associated with it. When we say Vande Guru Paramparam, this is what it is. On the one hand, the lineage of family people on the left, and the lineage of monks on the right, with Shankara in the middle. Notice the quotation marks for the word successful. And we are deliberately, as Rory said, we are deliberately putting the cart before the horse. So let's have a look at this dynamics of emotional distress. As in Vedanta, there's consciousness, Atma, which I am, and then my structure as it gets more and more dense, with the unconscious as the subtlest and the physical body as the densest as we head down. And then there's death, and then there's an upward little swing again. This is the working slide we'll be using. And on the left of the screen is the same, but in terms of vortices of energy, from the subtlest to the densest, with consciousness at the core of being. A few questions to start with. Who gets affected? And it's the living human being. What's a living being? Any form, and that includes from plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and of course for us in the human kingdom, the gift that we have of the intellect with which we can break free. A form manifesting life. And it's interesting that here we are trying to save life, but no one has actually defined what life is. We know we have to save lives, but what is life? It's very hard from a materialistic point of view to explain what it is. Whereas when we come from the knowledge of consciousness, it's the expression of Atma through form. And what happens to the form? Well, we've got the mind and the body. So in the mind, all those words in blue. In the body, there's the life force and how it manifests as the prana, the chi, and the musculoskeletal system, locomotion. What is a living being? And the example we use is this, a robot. So there are two principles here. Electricity by itself doesn't manifest movement. The robot by itself cannot. Why not? Because it is inert. It's lifeless. But bring the two together and you get a mixture, which is an aggregate of electricity with the inert matter. Bringing them together, you get an active robot. So this is the principle we use in explaining what happens to us. There is the consciousness aspect, Atma. Atma is omniscient, does not make mistakes. Matter, on the right-hand side, is inert and is unable to make mistakes. Put the two together, consciousness and matter, and you get a living being. And there are some examples there. And these slides will be available to everyone. The mixture, consciousness, enlivening matter in that combination. And the example that's often used is the sun lends light to the moon. The moon is inert, dull, dead. Yet when the sun lends light, so the moon borrows light from the sun, the moon looks bright, looks shining, looks attractive, but the moon remains in itself as such, inert, dull, dead. That's the application to us as living beings, a person. Our physical bodies, our minds, both matter, dense and subtle, they look alive, look functioning, even doing action in thought, word, and deed. And therefore, it is us as living beings that experience karma and its effects. So the conclusion is that it is the mixture. And as a mixture, I forget. I overlook my inherent nature of consciousness and identify with the form. You know all this. And the picture on the left is, instead of having the left hand and the right hand together, the left symbolizing consciousness, the right symbolizing matter. Instead of being this, it is now this. So consciousness is present. It's just that as a living being, I've forgotten the consciousness aspect, and I try to live my life like a ship without a rudder. The other example is using two hands. The right hand in front is person, and the left hand at the back is consciousness. So this is how we are, but we have forgotten the consciousness we are and think I'm functioning only from person. And so the effects of ignorance, I take on the qualities of my form, which is lack, limitation, mortality. And it is this that is at the core of all emotional distress, in whatever form it manifests. This feeling of incompleteness, of lack. So how does it occur? It's because of that mixture like twilight. Is it rope or is it snake? I can see something, but I don't know what it is. Is it a stump or is it a person? I know there is something, but I don't know what it is. Applied to ourselves, I know I am, but I don't know I am consciousness. Why does it happen? Because of ignorance. Where is it located? In the intellect. And the effect? Emotional distress of various kinds. A quick look at emotion. What exactly is emotion? The important point here is that at the core of every emotion is a thought. And of course, this thought is based on my identification with the form. And if my identification with the form makes me feel incomplete, the thought will be one of incompleteness. Then what we do is we add thought to thought to thought to thought. Now there's a whole aggregation of thoughts. It has a certain emotional, energetic weight to it. It's got a charge. And if you look in the middle in those green boxes, in the middle is a thought. It's neutral. When the thought first starts, it's neutral. Then it depends what we do with it. If we add negative thoughts and compound it with more and more negative thoughts, guess what the charge is going to be? Negative. If we add positive thoughts, the charge will be positive. Krishna described it beautifully in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 62 to 63, how with rumination, with thinking about adding thought to thought to thought to thought, and we end up with destruction of oneself. So let's look at a few general principles. In this slide, it's just to show you that there is that transfer of information from the physical brain to the intangible mind. And science still cannot explain how this happens. A lot of theories have been offered, almost based on quantum physics. How does something from matter produce something that is intangible? Whereas what we know is that from spirituality, we come the other way. From something which is subtle, and then there is that condensation of energy, it materializes and appears as a physical structure. And so this is the working slide we started with. What we do is, if you look at the pictures on the left, as a human being, we are intangible mind with tangible body, and it's very tightly held together. All we are doing is, in any form of treatment, any form of health, what we do is we separate the two and we try and work with both. Of course, when there is more physical problem, we have to deal with the body. And then you get a mixture of problems in the body which affect the mind and problems in the mind which affect the body. So we have to unhitch the two to be able to work with each aspect. And these are the treatment modalities then, starting from right at the bottom. And that's where modern medicine is at its best, when we are very close to death, as Ramji can attest. That's where pathological changes happen, and they can be measured with pathology testing, even with the subtlest machines we have, like MRIs, functional MRIs. Things can be detected and therefore can be handled. But as we go up that slide, we come into changes which happened, negative changes which happen in the body. But now we are in a range called functional. We are now in that range of functional medicine. These techniques require subtler methods of trying to find out what's going on. And in natural therapies, for example, we use iridology, using the iris. We use blood, but examined in a different way, and so on. And there are these nutritional methods of finding, like using the saliva, etc. Then as we get more subtle, we come into the energy body, the prana, and that's where acupuncture, etc. come in, yoga, qigong, etc. And when we come to the mind itself, that's where psychotherapy comes in. The principle, the basic principle in all psychological techniques is trying to change our viewpoint. Even though we are still working at the level of person, we are not working at the level of consciousness, Atma. That's the Paramarthanada level. We are working at the empirical level, Vyavaharika. So even at this level of person, the whole principle is to see myself as a subject and seeing the emotion as an object. So instead of being identified as the emotion, not with the emotion, being identified as the emotion, getting that separation. Because by seeing the emotion as an object and positioning myself as the subject, that distinction gives a space. And it is that space that gives some relief from emotional distress. Generally, we can look at what all the techniques are and divide them into two, the bio-psychological, and as we get subtler, the psycho-spiritual. So let's look at both. The bio side first, the biological, the physical body. And look, all the physical body needs are these simple things: clean, fresh air, clean water, nutritious food, regular elimination, sufficient exercise, adequate rest. And if you look at air, water, and food, we, as human beings, we've successfully contaminated the lot. And the body, we need a good physical body, because if we don't have a physical body, we are not here on earth. And if we are not here on earth, we don't have an intellect with which to break free from samsara. The physical body is important. Now, there's a lot of knowledge you have, so I'm just going to give an overview of the body-mind connection, starting with the basics, water. So the body is 66% water. And it's interesting that the brain is even more dilute, 73% water. And if you notice that funny word there, lunar, as in the moon. So if the moon can produce tides in the ocean, why wouldn't it have an effect on something that's 73% water? And it's well known in the psychological wards in the hospital. If it's full moon, everyone take care. So water. And that's what we need to replace the body with. And we know that the effects of dehydration can have not only physical, but also cognitive effects. Can't think clearly. Mood changes with dehydration. Then food, you know, we need a healthy diet to balance things. A child recently was asked to name the 5 food groups. You know what they are. So there's protein, carbohydrates, fats, the nutrients, and water. And guess what this child said? McDonald's, Hungry Jacks, etc., etc. So we have successfully confused our young ones. The 5 food groups, and a good balance, because we know that both when the body mass index is too high, or when people have starved themselves, as in various illnesses, there are mood disorders and there are changes in self-esteem. And we know from the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 17, those verses there, how foods affect the mind. Once in Swami Dayananda's ashram, the cook, he was quite a Rajasic guy. And one day he was really angry. And for breakfast, when he made the usual breakfast called upma, he threw in a handful of chili powder. That day, everybody in the ashram was hyper. Foods affecting the mind. And we know also that prenatal maternal diets have an effect on the fetus. So if there is a deficiency of the omega-3 fatty acids, for example, too much of the refined carbohydrates, there are effects on the fetus. And in addition, there are effects on adults as such. There was an interesting study on schizophrenics, and they found that 4% could reduce their medications if they went on a strict gluten-free diet. This is not to encourage you to go on a gluten-free diet, but just some information about how diet can even affect very serious psychological problems. The gut, it's known as the second brain. It produces as much serotonin as the brain does. And there is that nerve called the vagus nerve, which starts in the brain and goes right throughout the whole body. So that's why the term vagus, you can see the word vagabond. It just innervates the whole gut. And so that's that gut-brain connection, where a lot of research is going on, the effect of the vagus nerve. And the gut too has a lot of our protective tissue called the lymphoid tissue. So it's connected again, not just with cognition and emotion, but also with immune health. And there's a branch here called psychoneuroimmunology, meaning from thought to the nervous system to the immune system. And we know how we need good bacteria in the gut. It's called the biome. We need that for good health. And traditional systems of medicine, like traditional Chinese medicine, have made those connections, like connecting the large intestine with the lung and the skin, the small intestine with joy in the heart, etc. And we'll see that in a minute. And from Ayurvedic medicine, one of the principles in that 5 activities they do called panchakarma, one of them is every change of season, do a bowel cleanse. And there are different ways. So in the West, we've got colonic irrigation. And what could also be suggested is using that bowel preparation that's done for colonoscopies. So just a simple one, once every 3 months, to keep the bowel healthy by removing any toxic material out from the colon. And the principle there is a clear bowel is connected to a clear mind. Supplements. Now, this is a fairly contentious area. The whole principle in natural therapies is to balance the neurotransmitters in the physical brain. Notice physical brain, not the mind. So there are neurotransmitters in the brain, like those mentioned there, some which help and some which prepare the body for a flight or fight response. And the problem in modern society is that we've got so much of the fight and flight that the body is not able to relax. So the drive is a sympathetic drive, which overcomes the parasympathetic drive of rest, relaxation, nutrition. By trying to change those transmitters, we hope to get some effect in the physical body, but having its counterpart in the mind. This must always be done under care of someone qualified, because there are people who have used lots of supplements and ended up with liver problems. So care must be taken. For example, if you use a multivitamin with a lot of vitamin B6, you can have so much B6 that it damages your peripheral nerves and you end up with peripheral neuritis. So we say, but it's a natural vitamin. Yes, but in too much, in too high a dose, it can cause damage. Another example are the fat-soluble vitamins like vitamins A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. They are all fat-soluble, which means that they can be stored in the fatty tissues in the body, and one can go into toxicity. So that's why it has to be done under the care of someone. In any mental health issue, these are the compulsory 3 that must be had. The B complex vitamins. And the Bs work as a group. You cannot just pick one B and hope to use that. You need a complex because they work as a group. For example, if you have too much of B6, you could be deficient in B2. So the B complex, and you can use that as a multivitamin. The next one is the omega-3 fatty acids, critical for the functioning of the brain. After all, the brain is mainly fat, cholesterol, and we need something fatty to work with it. And the suggested dose is 2,000 milligrams twice a day. Most capsules are 1,000, so 2 in the morning and 2 at night. And finally, magnesium. Now, when you get your magnesium, you got to make sure it's not magnesium oxide. That's Epsom salts, and it's not absorbed at all. It's very poorly absorbed. But because it's so cheap, it's found in many formulations. But it's useless. You got to look for other forms of magnesium, like magnesium chelate, oxalate, magnesium orotate, etc. Anything except oxide. And when you look at the elemental magnesium, you need about 150 milligrams twice a day. So remember, this is working on the physical brain, trying to change the neurotransmitters. Then we've got the herbs. They're called nervine herbs. And the word there is trophorestorative, meaning, if you look at the hands together, if there is too flaccid, then the like a violin string that's too loose, These herbs can bring it back to normality. If it is too tight, like a violin string that's too tight, these same herbs can bring you back to balance. So that's called trove for restoration. And these are the kind of herbs that are commonly used. Some from Western herbs, some from Ayurvedic herbs, some from Chinese medicine. And we know, and I'm sure you all know, that low serotonin is associated with depression. So how do we raise that? Well, we use substances like SAMe, S-adenosylmethionine. Now, it's not the meth of crystal meth. This is methionine. And we start with 400 milligrams twice a day. It must never be used in states of anxiety because it worsens anxiety. That's one of its side effects. So you notice even a healthy substance can have side effects. And vitamin D3 and St. John's wort has been traditionally used. The next one is sleep, because sleep restores that natural balance in the circadian rhythm. Insomnia is a big problem today because insomnia affects mood, cognition. It's the principle that's used in torture. Keep a person awake, and after 3 or 4 days, they'll break down. Sleep. And therefore, we need good sleep hygiene. The bedroom must only be used for sleep, nothing else. We should not be using our computers in there, certainly not answering our emails, using our mobile phones. And the principle is this: what we see coming on the screen, coming towards our eyes, are actually light particles. They're called photons. So when a photon enters the eye, the message goes to the brain, the pineal gland, and the brain reads it as, oh, this is daytime. And therefore, the amount of melatonin drops. We need melatonin to help us sleep. It's a natural rhythm that as the sun rises, the level of melatonin drops. As the sun sets and darkness comes in, then the level of melatonin rises. So when we go at night, when we spend more time with our computers, TV, etc., those photons coming in, naturally, the level of melatonin is going to drop. So at least an hour before bed, we should turn off things. Supplements that can be used to help with sleep, melatonin. It only mimics the same melatonin that the brain produces. SAMe can help, and the vitamin D3. And we know excessive sleep is a symptom of depression. And trying to get the person to change that routine instead of sleeping till midday, 1 a.m., 1 p.m., trying to change that routine very gradually so that they've got regular sleeping hours. Exercise, lots of studies showing how exercise helps depression. And roughly 30 minutes, about 3 times a week. And the other benefit of exercise is exposure to sunlight. And that too has been shown to help in depression. As we get subtler, then there's energy healing. And we know acupuncture too has helped in management of emotions. And there's one particular one called Heart 7 at the wrist. And it's interesting in traditional Chinese medicine how they've linked an organ with an emotion. And the examples are there. With the heart, sadness. With the lung, grief. With the kidney, fear. With the liver, anger. With the spleen, worry. And so their approach is to manage these using the acupuncture meridians. They also use herbs and cupping, different techniques. It's a whole different way of understanding physiology and pathology. And we have yoga with pranayama, how the breath manages emotions. Qigong, Tai Chi, Reiki, etc. So for mild to moderate health problems, qualified psychotherapists. With severe ones, that's where medical intervention may be needed. Medication, psychiatry, and sometimes even admission into hospital, especially when there's suicide involved. From the Human Genome Project, there are now pathology tests that can match according to what your gene profile is, particularly in the liver, which medications would suit you. So it's individualizing medication now. This is particularly applicable to antidepressants, which ones not to use and which ones to use depending on the genetic profile. It's looking at the enzyme system called a P450 enzyme system, which detoxifies and metabolizes the different substances that come into our body, from food to nutrients to medications. So there are parallels in terms of health problems, physical problems with psychological problems. And we can see how with the physical body, there's a gradation from mild to moderate severe. And so the treatment modalities apply at different levels. Same thing with mental deterioration. You get mild to moderate to severe. So severe would be like the psychosis, bad neurosis, major depressive disorders, etc., where much heavier methods need to be used. And again, another comparison is for good physical health, it's not just trying to look at the environment. We also have to look at our own immune system for good health. In parallel then with mental issues, not only the environment, not only the setup around us, but also our inner resilience. That's the biological side. Now the psychological side. And so there are many schools of psychotherapy and therefore many techniques according to what each school proposed. All these lists there. There's one called the behavioral school and cognitive behavior therapy. And the principle there is learning to be a witness. In ordinary thinking, most people associate an event and the reaction that happens from it. Whereas in cognitive behavior therapy, they say, no, it's not a direct reaction. There is a belief behind the reaction. It's to try and discover what that belief is, drawing on experiences which confirm, yes, the negative belief, it does exist, but also looking at experiences that prove positive reactions, which obviously must come from a positive belief. So the whole principle there is just identify what the belief is and replace it. And that's where the psychotherapy comes in. The whole principle here is learning to be a witness, a subject, as person, at the person level. There is the psychoanalytic school of Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist. He's the one who introduced terms like the collective unconscious and archetypes. Interesting, he was fascinated by Buddhism, studied a bit. He did travel to India in 1937, 38, and supposed to have met Ramana Maharshi. The meeting did not happen. I'm not sure why. From the psychoanalytic school, another school developed called the School of Experiential Psychotherapy. So this is using experience, not just lying on a couch or on a chair and talking, not just words and words, but this using the physical body too, experiencing it. And that's an institute in Big Sur. And Stanislav Grof was a psychiatrist associated with them. Interesting, he's from Czechoslovakia. And in the 1970s, he was given permission to use LSD to treat psychological problems. They use a principle called holotropic breathwork, circular breathing. It's a form of controlled hyperventilation. And they use music in the background, evocative music, and at the same time doing body work. So you can see the mind, the prana, and the body are all involved in this. And of course, you need a trained practitioner. You must not do this by yourself. What happens with that hyperventilation, controlled hyperventilation, is that the conscious mind is bypassed. And so whatever is in the subconscious arises, is experienced, and awareness is brought to the problem, gaining insight into the issue. And that reduces the intensity. So learning to be the witness subject. It has been applied in two particular areas called sand play and voice dialogue. Sand play is interesting. Carl Jung himself, when he had his lunch, he would go to Lake Geneva and doodle in the sand. And he would not rub it off, but add to it each day that he went. And he realized that what he had done was just transferred what was in his mind onto the sand. Sand is used as a metaphor for the subconscious. Figurines are placed in the sand representing the different emotions and their interactions. In other words, using the sub-personalities to come to some understanding of what's going on. In this picture, for example, if you look, there's the sunflower in the middle and a lamb, and there are two foxes that are about to attack. What does that mean? That's where the client would explain to the practitioner, and the practitioner would help the client to understand what's going on. Voice dialogue is using the different sub-personalities to speak to each other. At the bottom of the slide, you see the witness cushion. They're learning to be the subject witness. That's the witness cushion. So the client sits on the witness cushion and places different cushions around, representing the different emotions. In other words, personifying the emotions. And the witness then would pick one cushion and have a conversation with that cushion. The person would then sit on that particular cushion. So let's use sad, for example. So from the witness cushion, the person would sit on the sad cushion and speak. They would say what it is, why it's there, how it came to be there, and what it wishes to be done. The person is asked to give it a shape, even a body posture, give it a color, give it a name, a sound. So can you see how they are making the emotion into an object? Then the person comes from the sad cushion back to the witness cushion and speaks and says, okay, what I learned from this interaction is XYZ. Interesting, Winston Churchill, he had quite a bad depression, but he called it his black dog, which would follow him everywhere he went. Psycho-spiritual. So now we're coming subtler. Not only is there the personality, but also that sense of something bigger than me, still at the level of person. And we can relate to a particular form or to a universal principle. And one way of connecting is obviously through prayer, a personal connection. There's a study done in an intensive care unit in the US. You know what it's like in intensive care? Well, the patients are unconscious. It's a controlled coma state. One group were prayed for, and another group exactly the same, but not prayed for, and they found certain differences. It was not a proper study, just an empirical work done. But interesting that it was reported in one of the journals. Yoga, Ashtanga yoga, the Ashtanga meaning eight limbs. What that does is it integrates the layers of our personality, the 5 layers. The 8 are listed there, and you can see how they help. Like yama, niyama, the do's and don'ts, stabilize the heart, the emotional body. Asanas and diet with the physical body. Pranayama, you know how the breath is the pulse of the mind. So it helps the mind in the antakarana in a general way. Pratyahara, the withdrawal of the sense organs. So learning how to manage the sense organs. And it's one of the 4 Ds in the 6 disciplines of the mind, managing the sense organs. Then dharana and dhyana, steady the intellect, the buddhi. And samadhi. Samadhi is not a blissed out semi-conscious state. It comes from the Sanskrit meaning sama, steady, even, balanced, mental equipoise, and di, meaning the mind. So it's that steady, equanimous state of mind which can deal with whatever problem comes. Difficult problems, steady. Pleasant circumstances, steady. And Shankara has commented on Ashtanga Yoga. He made a sub-commentary on Vyasa's commentary of Patanjali Sutras, but he himself gave some Vedantic equivalents to the 8 limbs. I've listed them here. I'm not going through them. The ones in italics are the Ashtanga Yoga. The rest that are not in italics are Shankara's explanations. Then we've got Vipassana. This is a personal favorite, but don't mind. Vipassana is a Buddhist meditation technique, and it's based on a particular sutra of the Buddha called the Mahāsaṃnipāta Sutra. In the West, we've got 2 main schools, the Goenka school and the Mahasi tradition. And it's 10 days of silent retreats. So during the silence, you're not just letting your mind waste away. We learn to closely watch. Watch what? We start with simple things like the breath, watch body sensations, watch body movements, like as we walk, can we focus on the movement of the foot, how we raise, push, drop, raise, push, drop. Then we look at the mind. Thoughts arise. So we observe how they arise, when they arise, what happens when they arise, and how, as with everything else, how they fade away, replaced by another thought, or an emotion can arise. This is effective training to be a witness subject at the level of person. To gain some benefit, at least 3 10-day retreats need to be done. So what it does is it leads to a highly sattvic mind. And from Vipassana, it's now being used generally. The breath, for example, is being used generally in society to calm the mind. Parents tell their children, stop, especially when it gets rowdy, stop, breathe. And the term mindfulness is now being used in psychotherapy. All it means is paying attention to what is happening right now. Let's look at the benefit and limitation. What's the benefit? All these delightful states of mind. Notice states of mind. Feeling good at the level of person. And it gives relief from emotional distress. And that IQ plus EQ in balance gives us that resilience. And in these 2 verses from the Bhagavad Gita, change is the only constant in life. That's what we have to deal with. Swami Paramarthanada has used these terms, the 5 C's: calmness, confidence, clarity, cheerfulness, courage. The 4 S's: self-respect, serenity, surrounds harmony, the setup around us, harmonious, and spiritual growth. So in other words, a steady sattvic mind. And with that, then the person is ready for immortality, as in verse 215 in the Gita. So as a person, I want to be happy and I want it to remain. I want to keep it. Feels natural to be like that. No doctors ever had a patient who's come and said, look, I've been happy for the last 6 months. What's wrong with me? You never hear that. And when there's any unhappiness, anything unpleasant, I cannot wait to eliminate it as soon as possible, like the dust in the eye. Can't rest till we've got rid of it. What's the limitation? Temporary, limited, only partial relief from emotional distress. In other words, it's not resolution, only reduction, palliation. And again, Swami Paramarthanada has used this acronym, a reduction in FIR, F-I-R, a reduction in the frequency of episodes. Excuse me. So they get less and less often. And even if they do occur, the intensity is less. And the time needed to recover from the episode also gets less. So instead of going on for hours or days or weeks, it's very brief. So reduction in FIR. How do we measure intensity? Does it occur only in thought? Does it occur in thought plus word? Notice it's getting a bit more intense. And most intense when there's thought plus word and an action is done. So that's how intensity you can measure for yourself. A reduction in FIR. So it's a recurrence, but it's less disruptive and it's better managed. As was said earlier, it's a sattvic mind, which is an enjoyable state of mind, but the gunas are still ruling us. We are still trapped. Yes, better to have a sattvic mind rather than a rajasic, tamasic mind, but all three, we are still trapped. What's the solution? Self-knowledge. A change from person subject to consciousness, Atma, capital S subject. And that's the domain of Vedanta. Thank you. So I'll stop share.